Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of Tinnitist TV. Today, I'm talking to Baxter Dury. If your response to that is, who? Don't feel out of the loop. Baxter Dury is hardly a household name in North America. In fact, I think it's safe to say that far more people are familiar with his late father, Ian Dury, the eccentric British New Wave artist who wrote the song and coined the phrase sex and drugs and rock and roll. That track was on his 1977 album New Boots and Panties, and fun fact, the young boy standing next to Ian on the album cover is Baxter Dury at age 6. Since then, like a lot of second-generation artists, Baxter has followed in his father's footsteps to some degree, while also carving out his own path over the course of 6 solo albums. Bottom line, if you know and like Ian Dury, you should get to know Baxter because you'll like him too. And there's never been a better time to make his acquaintance. This year, he released his frank and revealing memoir Shays Long and prepped the forthcoming compilation album Mr. Maserati. Recently, Baxter zoomed in from his riverfront apartment in London, the same suite where he used to live with his father and a minder known as the Sulfate Strangler, so we could talk about his life, his career, his future plans, and whether his father should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Here we go. So 2021 has turned out to be a pretty eventful year for you. I mean, you've got the anthology coming out, you've had the memoir, and if I've got my math right, your 50th birthday is coming up.
Wow, we don't need to discuss that one. We can re-edit.
So was this all a grand plan or just a series of coincidences?
Oh, it's a sort of level of COVID-inspired boredom that made me productive, I guess, like a lot of people. I mean, there's a sort of huge influx of miscellaneous nonsense and good and bad stuff that people generated, didn't they, in the confines of their own house. And the book, I contracted to do that 2 years before, but I don't think I really had any great intention of really doing it because I didn't believe I could. But until that situation kicked in, I had no other choice because I had nothing else to do. So,
well, you've been productive, obviously. Let's start with the album, Mr. Maserati. How does it feel to have a best of album at this point in your life? Was this something you had anticipated or seen down the road when you started on this path?
I mean, without it linking or acknowledging any cynicism about it, I think it's a kind of a provisional thing that fills in a gap between your next album and maybe a book. So I see it like that. It's a compilation of stuff. Whether I warrant a best of, I'm not quite sure, not to underdo myself or do myself any devalue myself, but maybe I see it as a sort of interim offering in between projects, as opposed to this sort of grand, this defines me. I'm not sure if I really warrant that, but I'm really glad there is one, and there's a compilation and of stuff that I'm proud of. A best of, it's hard to title it anything else because it sounds too like kind of dour. If you call it a compilation, sounds a bit medicinary or something. It doesn't sound correct any other term. So we had to call it that. Is what I'm trying to say.
Was it fairly easy to pick and choose the tracks on this? Did it require you to sort of go in and reassess everything, or was it just nope, this one?
I think there's a sort of obvious popularity for some. It'd be silly to get too obscure. I mean, I think my popular ones stand there for a reason, and I even found in my own catalogue I can get quite obscure, maybe in my earlier days. So I thought it was quite obvious. There's a few nuanced tracks that I chose, which I'm quite proud of, but which are less popular, but I think quite influential for myself.
Mm-hmm. Did you spend a lot of time, putting together a kind of a moving list and going this, that, or did you reassess it all?
22 minutes.
Oh, yeah, that quick, huh? All right.
I think so, yeah.
And then, of course, you included the new song DOA. What's the story behind that one?
Well, I mean, it needed something fresh to link it in, and that's a kind of nod to the future, maybe. And it was good to do something that maybe for me felt different from the rest of it. So And I think it's always maybe difficult to tell how different it is for everyone else, because as soon as I feature, I'm an identifying factor that stays the same, because I'm not a very versatile singer. So my character remains pretty similar, but musically or sonically, it had a different feel to me. So it was an interesting segue maybe into something new, or something that I would find inspiring to work on again. You know, if you tread the same path for too long, it can feel like work. And I thought, well, what I was doing was starting to feel a bit like work if I'd carried on or continued in it. So that's nice to put a new track on there, I thought.
Yes, it is. Is it one of several that you've got on the go? Are you already working on the next album, or?
I'm definitely working on it. It's a slow process because I'm trying to sort of shift something within it, and I'm sort of changing some of the people I work with. I've been working with my son a lot, who's just young and has a sort of connection understands he's got a whole different young person's wisdom, which I find hard to digest sometimes. And some of the good bits I can recognize I've been stealing, basically. And that's kind of interesting. And yeah, it's been good. And what was the question? I think I've gone off track there.
I think you've answered it. I was just looking at this point in the direction you are heading musically, and it sounds like it does. Yeah. Talking about working with fathers, I mean, obviously you came to music later in life. You didn't work with your father as a musician. Do you regret that now, or would you even have had the ability to do it? I mean, I could imagine it being a daunting thing to make music while your father was still around.
I mean, my dad was a different set of characteristics than I am. You know, it wasn't so much as his aesthetic and his need to do something was sort of had a different energy to it. So he not wanted to be famous, but he wanted to control his environment, and that meant being famous and all that sort of stuff. So he had a different kind of motivation. Whereas as a result of his fame and maybe some of his money and stuff, I have a whole different outlook on it, and consequently so does my son. So we're much more aesthetically driven. Not to say that he wasn't, but we're going, isn't this a great sound? Isn't this? He was on a mission to be who he was, if you know what I mean. Does that make any sense?
I think it does, yeah.
A conversation of choices with him. It was he had to be him to survive, if you see what I mean. So it wasn't likely that I was ever going to be invited into a conversation about what we should, not in the same way that I've just done with my son. Right. We're at the next generation of that think in a different way, in a way I'm really glad of, you know.
Are you still
explaining that?
Are you still living in the same flat where you lived with him?
Yeah. I mean, you can, if I look that way, you can see the River Thames. I don't know if you can see it that way.
Right. Oh, that's okay. And the bridge right there. Okay.
Yeah, that's Hammersmith Bridge, West London.
Right.
So go on.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think a therapist would be able to make a lot out of that, of you still living in the same apartment all these years later.
Well, whether they'd advised me to carry on or not, it was a strange set of circumstances. But I mean, I re-rented this house because I own a quarter of it. So by me taking the quarter I own of it off the rent made it competitive almost, but it's still really expensive, obviously, because you're overlooking the river. And then COVID happened, and then I wrote about the place I was brought up here. So it's a bit cannibalistic. It was a bit of a cannibalistic loop to live here and right here. And that it's a bit bleak, but I conquered that, and I felt, and I love living. I mean, you've got the River Thames. How good is that?
Oh yeah, gorgeous. Speaking of writing, obviously, Shays Long is out in Britain. It's not out over here yet in print. I've read excerpts and listened to some of the audio excerpts online. What was it like to take that journey? Was it easy for you? Was it transformative, cathartic? I'm just kind of wondering, what that what that experience was like for you.
All of those things, I think. It was hard. It was hard academically because I left school at such an early age. So that level of concentration, or the idea I could do it, was so unproven, and I had a lot of doubt about how to get there. And I had to sort of make some bold choices about not pretending to be something I couldn't possibly be in terms of literary, you know. So I knew I could sort of talk a spiel, but to convert that into writing that's legible and understandable and poetic, it's a whole different art form. And so I just quickly found my own formula. And once I did that and sort of stood by it, then it seemed to work, you know. So it was good. It was better now, a year after I'd done it, and as the result of it being out, and actually, I think it has been kind of what you call a success locally. You know, locally, it sold pretty well and it got reviewed pretty well, and I feel pretty proud. I couldn't feel
Did you do it mostly for yourself or mostly for other people?
Narcissistically and for myself, you know. I just thought, but now I'm totally narcissistically enjoying it. But I don't know, I did it to prove to myself, because you can't do that for other people, that level of effort. You can only do that for yourself.
Well, what did you learn about yourself and your relationship with your father by going through this process? It must have at some point opened your eyes to things that happened, or motivations, or other aspects of your relationship.
Well, it's not about me and dad, so that was interesting, because what I could do is position everybody. So I wrote about mom, dad, everybody, and all the people, all orbited around, and I could actually, it made me be able, because you can live in a very chaotic bohemian manner, and then as you get to a certain age, you blame that chaos for some of your, you know, your things that you don't get right in your life. And I think this book helped me get over all that and go celebrate it a lot more, and go, my parents were really fantastic, and how lucky in lots of ways. I got lots to celebrate. And you can find equal amounts of disruption in everyone's life in different forms. Mine was very obvious and easy to talk about at dinner parties, and everyone feels sorry for you, but it manifests in different ways in other people's lives. And actually, overall, I had a brilliant life and brilliant parents.
So no regrets?
No, none at all, actually. I came out right. I'm feeling good.
Yes, no. You're doing okay so far, it seems. It seems, in fact, that you've been busier and busier lately. It's almost as if you're kind of building momentum in the past few years. What's behind that?
I guess it's someone like me from a background that you're from. It's quite a rare heritage. You know, musical heritages are awful, not because the fault of the children, but it's a very hard thing to navigate around. And essentially the mistakes are made that the offspring emulate the parents in some way, and that perishes quite quickly, doesn't it? Because you can't be a diluted version of somebody that's quite unique. If you see what I mean, you can't be another Bowie or a Mick Jagger or any of it. All these people, you can't be another version of that. And it's taken me a while to work out that and become myself and get accepted, and then feel confident about that. And now I feel confident about who I am.
As a songwriter, what's your process? I mean, obviously you spend a tremendous amount of time on the words, it seems. Are you someone who gets up every day and is writing, or are you waiting for the lightning bolt of inspiration, or how does it work for you?
Oh, I mean, incredibly, sort of, what would you say, a kind of ad-libbing, counterfeit, bullshitting kind of, you know, like, I don't write anything down.
Really?
And I sort of struggle with me, you know, I wait and then I find the right moment, and I don't write. I write a page every 2 months, and maybe I'll refer to that. But the one thing I have, I can just sort of pour out as a stream of stuff from somewhere. So I use that, but as soon as I write it down, to me, it becomes quite awkward sounding, and I feels too self-aware. So, and that's a blessing and not a blessing, because it can be quite a long process waiting for good stuff to happen.
Yeah, I would imagine. You must have a tremendous memory. I mean, obviously you weren't working from journals to write the book, right?
No, I wrote it down, although I obviously wrote that down. And I do, as I write a song or a record it. I mean, these days, everything's so accessibly recorded. You can record things really easily, can't you? Yeah. As soon as I'm writing in that sense. I'm writing it down or singing it.
Yeah.
All the kind of stuff that it's being accounted for. I don't sit there with a quill, you know, in a moment. I don't have an hour set aside with
Uh-huh,
my
uh-huh.
oat milk tea, and you know, I don't do that. No.
All right. So what's the next project for you? A new album?
I'm currently in the process of doing that, yeah, which is, you know, interesting. I've got a bit of creative fatigue at the moment. I'm a bit like, Jesus, you know, but I'm sort of enjoying the shift of where I want to go. The idea of where I want to go is interesting, and I'm enjoying the result of the book. And there's some other projects related to that that are in play, maybe some sort of film things. That's
Oh,
really
wow.
interesting. And lots of stuff like that. And I guess when you do something like a book and it feels quite successful, it opens up your sense of what, you know, what can I do next? You know, it's a nice age to approach and go, actually, you know, musically, I'm feeling in a unique place, which is where I always wanted to be. I'm not a version of Dad. I'm, you know, blah, blah. And
Mhm.
that feels pretty good. I'm
As it
about to
should.
have dinner with my managers, actually, in a sort of celebratory manner. So, you know,
Good.
it's quite.
Congratulations. So no midlife crisis for you?
I mean, I'm constantly on the verge of some crisis, but that's, you know, I don't mean it's middle-aged or it's just there. I'm on like some crisis surfer. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, no, I'm fine. I'm feeling good.
Okay, good. You mentioned, you know, having the new possibilities open up. Is there something on your wish list that that you've always wanted to do that maybe now you could?
I mean, I film of some kind, but I don't know how much I should try and take responsibility for that myself. I don't want to ruin something. I like to inspire that event to happen well, or television, because television's so good these days.
Who would
Maybe.
you like to play you in a film?
Well, if I was doing the book, they talked about my son doing it, but he's too good looking. He's gone too symmetrical already. I was thinking it's not really believable, but I don't know yet. We'll see about that. I mean, it depends when. It would be hard push to find a young me.
Uh, but having your son play you again just adds another layer to that, another rotation to that whole circle you've got going on.
It might burn. I mean, he's quite clever because he's not interested in the family vacuum, but he is actually clever in the sense that he's actually incredibly skilled, but very careful about not sort of launching into it, you know.
Well,
So
he's learned his lessons well.
he's sensitive to it, yeah.
Should your father, the man who coined the phrase "sex and drugs and rock and roll," does he not belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for that alone?
I didn't know whether he was or wasn't. I mean, I think he kind of, I mean, it's an American acknowledgement, isn't it? And
Yes.
then he sort of ruined his month in America once. Quite, if you ever read a biography, it's quite an interesting. I think he purposely he did that thing where maybe he didn't know whether he'd succeed there, so instead of not knowing, he just ruined it. And
Well,
it's
that's
sort
one
of
way to deal with it.
kind of anti-American cultural moment in the 70s, and it's related to punk, and he just went and he scuppered it, you know. He went there and purposely, and they just went, well, who the fuck is this limey? Who is this little man? And I think he upset a few too many people.
And how do you feel about North America?
Well, it's a vast, yeah, I mean, it's never been on our agenda because it's never used to, my music's too, it's more provincial than provincial, you know, so I don't think anyone's been able to even dig into it really or understand it on any level. I can understand them liking him, and that's quite anthemic, and there's some sort of, but mine's really odd. So I never really thought about it. I don't want to go and do that circuit of the kind of symmetry of America, you know, that might start to feel a bit. I've been to America a few times, and I wrote a lot of music out there, so I know a bit about it.
Sure.
But obviously, I would die to go and play a few gigs there. I'd love it.